right. This is John Chen, and it's Monday. And check out this. I'm in Monterey, California. I'm here actually running the virtual presentation summit today with our good friend, giving a shout out to Rick Altman. We had a fantastic day running a new model. He's one of the first to take hybrid, and he just said, I don't want to do hybrid. He actually split his conference to both in person and virtual. And he's one of the first to do this decision. And I'm curious to see what the outcome will be. You know, one of the things certainly is now we can optimize both venues, right? The in-person as well as the virtual for both of the platforms. And there's certainly some logic inside of that. So stay tuned. And if you want to check it out, search the Presentation Summit. Again, happening now and will happen again next year, which is already in the works. Meanwhile, when we're not producing programs, I get a chance. Oh, actually, when I am producing other programs, this is where I got to meet this next gentleman. I was at Learnapalooza, which I'm super proud about. Right, we ran three high hybrid rooms at the exact same time, and this gentleman was in one of them, and he's on one of my favorite topics around podcasting. Let's introduce the one and only Vernon Ross. Vernon.
Hey, what's going on, man?
Oh my gosh.
I feel like I should have danced in.
There is a dance contest for the people who walk on, right? There's not dancers and non-dancers, Vernon. So you got to figure out which team that you're on.
I'll probably go team non-dancer.
Oh my gosh. So Vernon, you hail from the great city of St. Louis. Is that correct?
St. Louis, Missouri, right?
That's
Smack
right.
dab in the middle of the country.
With the inclinator inside of your arch. For my friends who don't know you yet, Vernon, do us a favor. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I'm Vernon Ross. I'm a podcaster by trade. So I've been in the podcast industry, since like 2008. I work with companies to help them launch internal podcasts. I also work with a lot of public podcasts to help them launch podcasts as well. I do some facilitation and training and around subjects, DE&I and just about anything. I'm like a facilitator and podcaster at heart. So I have a lot of really good conversations with a lot of engaging people.
Outstanding. Well, thank you with people on Facebook who already said, hi, John, and they're interested more in what you do, Vernon. Now, so you're saying that you started podcasting a long time ago before the trend really maybe blown up. So tell me, how did you get into podcasting?
You know, I fell into it. I had a client. She was really annoying. And the reason that she was annoying is because, and we're good friends, so I've told her the story. Okay. She kept telling me about podcasts. She had discovered a couple of business shows that were on podcasts, and they were talking about social media. And I was doing social media and digital marketing at the time and trying to help her with hers. And she just kept telling me stuff about these folks that were on these podcasts. And I'm like, oh my God, I guess I need to start a podcast. So I read Michael Hyatt's book, Platform. And I'm like, oh, okay, platform. I can have my own platform. So why not do podcasting? I felt like it was easier than video at the time. So I launched a podcast pretty much to satisfy this person that I was dealing with, and thought that if I interviewed some of the people she was talking about, it would just give me more authority in the business community. And that's pretty much how the podcast started.
Shout out to Veronica Reed, who's watching also here on Facebook. And so give me some podcast stats. So I know you have to kind of now lay out the landscape of where podcasting is now. So if you have to explain to somebody who knows nothing about podcasting, what are some of the numbers that you give out about it?
About 150 million people a year now are aware of the term podcasting, what it is, and listen pretty much on a yearly basis. There's a really good report by Edison Research. I've referenced this report many a times, and they talk about, it's called the Share of Ear Report or the Infinite Dial. And they talk about everything podcasting. They also talk about radio and listening trends, but more people are listening year over year to podcasting than just about any other medium. It's growing as radio is shrinking.
Wow.
It's keeping up with online video and streaming services. People are really consuming podcasts because it's bespoke audio content on whatever subject you want. So whatever you're into, there is generally a podcast for it.
And what do you think now too is there's lots of formats and there's lots of things that
Mhm.
died, right? you know,
Oh yeah, the pod
Beta,
fade.
VHS, even Clubhouse is kind of like in this
Oh yeah.
auditory, but maybe didn't quite make it format. And
Mhm.
so, what do you think is the magic about a podcast that people like?
For some, it's the simple podcast, no frills. They don't need the background music. They just want the information from the host. I think the magic, quite honestly, is the host. Some people think it's length. Some people think that it's production quality. It's really not. It's
Mm.
the host, and if the host is engaging with the audience that they've connected to, it goes back to the old days of radio. When you listen to a DJ, for folks that grew up with radio, and you listen to them all the time, you
Yes.
felt like you knew them. So if you happen to run into them in the street, you were like, "Oh, that's so and so from KWR or whatever it is," and you felt like you knew the person. It's the same way with podcasts. It's theater of the mind. It's in your ear and you build a connection to those folks. So I think the real magic of podcasting is the host. If the host is engaging, you'll have magic with your podcast.
All right, let's talk about that then. What are like two or three of the top things that you think a host has? You say engaging, and that can mean a lot of things to a lot of
Yeah.
different people. So I'd love to hear like either maybe some of your favorite hosts or favorite
Mhm.
qualities of a host.
You know, I don't know that I have any really like favorite hosts. Terry Gross from NPR, she's one of my favorite. Glenn Washington is
Mm.
also like an NPR guy. Snap Judgment, and he has a podcast called Spooked that's just about scary stories. They're
Oh,
great
right.
storytellers. Yeah, you like Spook? I love Spook.
I've heard about it. I've heard. Again. These are some of those too. There's so much content out there. You're trying to figure
Yeah,
out, who's hot and who should I listen to. On my list was Freakonomics, right? Freakonomics, based
right.
off of the book, did a really good job on. They're on Stitcher, and you
Mhm.
can actually hear the progression of their podcast. Because I actually went
Yeah.
backwards after I liked it and went from episode one and listened to them
Mhm.
as they went through episode 100 and 200, and they found a groove too. I think that's something
Yeah.
around it, Vernon, which is uh, all podcasters should stick with it
Yes.
because you'll find a
Yeah.
groove, even if it sucks in the beginning. You somewhere along the line, you will find the groove,
It
right?
will suck in the beginning. No, no matter who you are, it's gonna suck. It may be a version of good, but it's not gonna be great when you first start. So get past that 10th episode. So there's a saying in podcasting, it's been around for a few years now. A guy named Cliff Ravenscraft actually coined this stat is that most podcasts fail about 80% after or before episode number 10 because they get in and they realize exactly how difficult it is to produce a podcast, particularly if you're doing it every day. You have to get in a cadence and just stick with it. I know he had thousands of episodes before he ended that podcast. It was called Podcast Answers, man. It's a great podcast. I learned a lot from it and got to know Cliff. But it's interesting when you start podcasting. If you don't stick with it, you just don't get that podcast muscle built. So no matter how bad it feels, just keep sticking with it. Keep doing your guests, keep doing those interviews. And if it's just like a single talking head, there's so much content out there. There's an inexhaustible amount of content and things to talk about. So if people go, "Oh man, I can't think of anything to talk about," just go on the internet and figure out what you like. And there's somebody else that's going to want to hear about it.
Well, that's what convinced me. So when I quit my job at Microsoft and I took some time and I toured the United States, and that convinced me that you can have a job doing anything in America for the most part. Like you have a passion around anything. There's a city and a place that will support you somewhere.
There
Uh,
it is.
I would love to hear though some of these suck stories, right? Just so people know that even if they have a bad podcast, that you can recover from it. But I would love to hear some of Vernon Ross's biggest suck stories. Meaning, you
Oh
don't have to
my.
name any names, right? Unless they let you. But I would love to hear some of the biggest disaster stories.
All right. So when I first started,
Mm.
the way that I actually started my podcast, I knew I wanted to do a podcast. I had planned for it to start. There was a site and they specialize in podcasts for television shows.
Yeah.
It was a great idea. They were like a 90-minute a week show, and they were going to pay the host. I was like, oh wow, this is a great concept. I didn't want to do the podcast for them, but I was slated to interview the creator of this.
Yeah.
Day that I was supposed to go, September 30th, no show. And I'm like, oh, great. My backup was a no show. My backup guest, I had a backup guest. And then my backup to the backup guest was also a no show. So my
Oh,
first podcast episode was a solo show where I got on the mic and riffed for about 30 minutes. And that was it. I launched it officially October 1st because it was midnight by the time I recovered from the 3 no shows. So that was like the biggest fail, number one.
wow. So here, I'll tell you some of the systems that at least I've developed for this podcast because it can be easy. But you got to
Yeah.
develop a system. And so, like, for instance, I use a scheduler. So mine's Microsoft Bookings because I used to work at Microsoft.
Mhm.
And it's so easy to schedule an interview. Like, I go to a group of speakers and I'm like, who wants to be on a podcast? And it's like 7 people, right? So you network around. I make it easy. I schedule the hour whenever you want. It's not when I want, it's whenever you want. So
Mhm.
that's number 2. Number 3 is then you just got to get into Zoom. So that makes it extraordinarily easy. And
Yep.
then use Restream here. So using Restream means that when I push this button, not only am I recording this, but I instantly put it out to 15 different locations at the same time, including YouTube, and then end it, right? And then everything is, I don't even have to publish it in any way. So if anyone's subscribed to my YouTube channel, they get it instantly. And now the last part is I do have a virtual assistant who will take the YouTube, strip out the video, just go straight to the audio and put it up. And now I used Buzzsprout. And now the Buzzsprout is going to another 13 different places distributing a
Mhm.
podcast. So, there are ways. I know it sounds like I said a bunch of stuff, but here's the funny part. It's like, all I have to do is follow my calendar, push a few buttons, and now I'm almost up to episode 100, Vernon.
That's
So,
it, man. That's that magic number.
oh, and is that the other number? Like if I get to
That's the other
100,
magic
I have
number. Yeah.
something?
You have to celebrate once you get to 100. It's a milestone. Just like if you live to 100, you got to celebrate. You get to 100 podcasts, you got to celebrate.
Hmm. What's the best way to, the one challenge I still have as a new podcast though is getting people to subscribe to it and of course listen. So one of the things we track is downloads and other stuff like that. So what do you
Mhm.
think is the number one tip then after you make the podcast? It's kind of like an author, right? Everybody who wants to be an
Yeah.
author, I tell them writing the book is only 20% of the problem. Selling the
There
book
it
is
is.
the other 80%, right?
Yes, it
So,
is. And your publishing company, if you have one, they won't do it for you.
no,
So
no.
you learn that when you publish a book through a publishing company, they will not sell for you.
Yeah.
The biggest way to promote a podcast is quite honestly an email list.
Hmm,
It's marketing 101, building an email list of people that you connect with over a period of time. You can start with your LinkedIn connections
hmm.
and request, not just like add them to an email list, but let them know that you're starting a podcast and ask them if they want to get notified when you have a new episode. That's all you got to do. I started with like my LinkedIn connections, Facebook connections. You
Yep.
can't be afraid to let people know and start building an email list. That is like the easiest, quickest way to honestly build an audience. And even if you don't have one,
Hmm.
just communicating with folks on social directly,
Yep.
things that don't scale, like a one-to-one conversation. Hey, would you subscribe to my podcast? I'm starting a new podcast. I'm really looking for subscribers, and it would be important to me if you just took a listen to maybe 1 or 2 episodes.
Yeah.
That's really the way that you build a podcast.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, let's see. So, are you podcasting with a lot of virtual meetings, or tell me what did you do with virtual meetings over the last 3 years, Vernon, when of course everybody had to start?
What was funny, most of my virtual meetings were speaking gigs. I had been speaking in person at conferences and stuff like that, and doing some podcasts via video. Most of mine were audio only, although we would do the video just to make the guests more comfortable. Sometimes they weren't. So if they weren't comfortable, we shut the cameras off and do audio only. But I ended up doing more virtual conferences in 2020 and 2021 as speaking gigs than just about anything else. And what I learned is backgrounds have to be nice. Using a nice camera helps a lot when you want to engage an audience, particularly for, you're speaking and you're doing a thing and people want to be, they don't want just your kitchen or your couch. You've got to have something. If you're in an office, try to, jazz it up just a little bit. Good lighting helps. Definitely a good camera. More than
Yeah.
one is great if you can do it, but just the basics of, if you want it to look nice in a virtual meeting, think about it like, what would I want to see for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or 8 hours if you're going to be in a virtual conference?
Outstanding. Well, all you people who are watching, Gregory Knievel and of course my good friend BJ Stewart in Chicago is taking a peek here, doing some great work with
Hey, Showtime.
oh yeah, he's doing some amazing work. He's helped entrepreneurs, help write business plans and get their businesses funded. So
Mhm.
really cool work. So if any of you have a podcast, hit it in the chat. Oh gosh, Philip Jones too. They run training magazines like Webinar Network. They have an immense
Oh
webinar
yeah.
network that goes along with that. So Vernon, tell me too about most people think of podcast as audio, but
Mhm.
video is also becoming, I think, a part of a lot of people's podcasts. What are you seeing on that?
Oh man, you touched on a sore subject for a lot of old school podcasters.
Oh yeah, because they want the audio only, right? And they they live
Yeah,
there.
you
They live
you
there.
will get arguments from folks that a video is not a podcast. I'm I used to be in that camp. I gave up on it. I'm like, you know what? YouTube is in there and they have an RSS feed.
Hmm,
So it is officially a podcast. Um, I honestly, I think it's a good way to engage your audience. People want to see what's happening
yeah,
on your podcast. Um, you can do audio only and it's great and it's fine. And you can put some video up, but honestly, if you can have good interactions with a guest and do it on video, you're reaching a wider audience. So back to what you were talking about with growing your podcast, you have the video that's
yeah.
going out to a bunch of folks. If you're doing what John recommended, then that's even better where you're putting it a bunch of places so you have more opportunities to touch folks and do the audio. So I'm not in a either or, but I do think that video is a great way to expand a podcast, get you comfortable on camera, and reach your wider audience. So yeah, I'm all for the video podcast. I think it's a great medium to leverage.
You're not team either or. You're team both and, right?
I am now. Yeah, I'm team both and at first I was like, no, it's not a podcast. It's not. Nope.
Oh, so you were team audio only for a
Yeah, I was
while.
team audio only for a long time. I'm like, no, it's stupid. It's not a podcast. It's a video cast. It's a video show. It's a TV show. It's not a podcast. Yeah, I was in that crew for a long time.
So, in the virtual meetings, of course, you said, get your surroundings right, get your audio right. Now, you talked a lot about engagement and hosts. In a virtual meeting, what has to happen for you, Vernon Ross, for you to be engaged in a virtual meeting?
For me, mostly it's the content.
Mm,
However, being able to interaction is great. Platforms like I'm drawing a blank on the one platform. I've been on it a few times. Oh, Hey Summit. Hey Summit is a
Oh
great
yeah, Summit,
platform. I've
sure.
used that. I've been
Yep.
on that. There's a few other ones that I've used that are like really good where there's audience interaction. There's polls that are going off.
Right.
There was some great stuff at Learn-A-Palooza
Yes.
with surveys and all of that stuff. If you can like pull the audience in, it's actually more engaging than some of the in-person uh conferences that I've been to. Because when you're in those, you slink into a room, you sit down, maybe you'll take some notes, you might pull out your laptop, but there's not much interaction with you and the speaker until the Q&A. If
Yes.
they are doing polls, then sometimes, you're trying to do it on your phone and they're trying to talk and it's just not as smooth as a virtual conference. So quite honestly, the polls and the interactions and the Q&A, all of that stuff, I actually love it. And when you were doing it at Learn-A-Palooza, that's one of the best implementations of it I've actually seen in a hybrid because there was like stuff I'm like, wow, I should have used the virtual like poll stuff because I didn't in my presentation. I was like, I should have did this. This was nice. So yeah, I like the polls and the questions to the audience. It's really nice and it pulls you in.
Well, you'll check this out. So in this conference here, Carmen Simon, so Carmensimon, Carmen Simon, just releasing some new research that her company has done, and it was really amazing. They took like a 10 or 15-minute sales pitch, and they found somebody, and this person has to deliver the sales pitch exactly the same way every single time, and they tested it over in person, hybrid, virtual, and a phone. And surprisingly, people at, you ask, what do you think is the most engaging format? And of course, almost 80% of the audience said face to face. But they're doing things like they have biometrics and they have a bunch of other, eye trackers and things like that. It turned out that virtual is actually a much better way to hold somebody's attention in this particular case. It was like a 10 or 15-minute sales pitch. And so it was very surprising in its results around it. They said the second one that was actually the second most effective was the phone,
Yeah.
Vernon. Right? This gets you back to that auditory piece by only having one channel and having that person focus on that channel.
Hmm.
Actually, turned out that they had better results, like higher ratings, and people said they were more likely to buy. So I don't know if you've seen any of this research, but you definitely want to check.
No, but I'm gonna have to look into that. That is fascinating. It kind of lends into that thing with video when things are changing often. It helps you to focus on it.
Yes.
So the virtual, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense for me. And then the audio part, I know that when you're hearing things, for at least a lot of people, or maybe not a lot, but some people, they're auditory learners, and so hearing it helps them build the picture in their mind, and they're kind of picturing things as you're talking to them. And it's all goes back to storytelling, which is one of the things I talk about, is how to tell effective stories.
Well, the other piece of research that went along with this, Vernon, it was a separate research, but they said animations, right? So something that is changing actually increases the retention for the user when you use animation versus not using animation. So I thought
You
that
know,
was interesting too.
I thought when Powtoon first came out,
Mm.
it's a software.
Oh
Some
yeah.
people may be familiar with it. I hated it. I'm like, this is distracting. This is stupid. Nobody's gonna want to watch this. Until I actually engaged with a few, and I'm like, oh, this is
Oh.
actually really good. And now I'm actually watching this and paying attention. I like cartoons, so it quickly changed my mind after I got into it. But yeah, I initially didn't think that it was something that people would like, but I experienced it after a couple of training courses I had to take, and I'm like, this is actually really good. So yeah, I get that the research is solid.
Solid, and sometimes yeah, your initial impression and the the long-term impression, and this is the other part too. I still think there's a lot of things where there's not enough research. People don't really know.
Mhm.
You have your own personal opinion, but is that actually what's
Right.
really happening? I think that's there's still a lot out, especially in the virtual and the hybrid field. Speaking of the future, Vernon, then what do you think is the future of podcasting? Yeah,
Mm.
what do you think the future of podcasting is going to go in the next, what, 5, 10 plus years?
Future of podcasting. I honestly, I feel like it's going to go more towards video.
Hmm.
But I do think that the audio portion of podcasting is here to stay. I feel like people are more interested in, or at least very interested in, what goes on in the studio, particularly for podcasts where it's more than one host.
Yeah.
Folks love it. They love to watch kind of inside a studio and see people going back and forth. And I think, quite honestly, because of reality television, when you have that camera changing back and forth to people as they're talking, it does pull you in, even if you don't like reality TV. It's a very effective way of delivering content to folks. So I really see podcasting evolving to that, where shows are going to become a lot more mature and a lot more production, and people are really going to go for the video production quality and distribute it via podcasts, and then have maybe an audio companion to that podcast that's not everything that was on video, but highlights and things that are going on like that, which you're now starting to see for series like Netflix series and movies. Almost every last one of them have a companion podcast that comes out now that talks about special things that are happening with that particular show. So I kind of think that's where it's going, more specialized, higher production values. That's pretty much where I think it's going.
And for those who are doing podcasts here, look, you can even do simple production value here in this. In this case, I'm using Zoom to control the video. So in just a moment here, right now I can do this. You should be able to only see me. And one of the best things that you can do, the default is just come on here in the beginning, right? Add your guest here. Right? When your guest starts talking, sometimes you can go off screen like this. And so these are simple things because what happens too, I think for a lot of people, every time they see a transition, like that quick flash of something happening, they're going, oh, something else should be going on here. So my good friend Nicole Smith is here too. And she goes, I can't stand podcasts. She can't figure out why, but she did used to be a teacher. So I don't know. She's on team non-podcast.
I have good friends that are friends of podcasters, but they hate podcasts. So don't feel bad.
It's okay. Well, so what do you think the future of virtual is too? So now virtual, of
Oh
course,
wow, yeah.
rocketed the last 3 years, and now it's the world's in person though. It certainly took a decline this year, and I'm just curious from your viewpoint, Vernon,
Mhm.
where do you think virtual is gonna find its place in the next couple years?
There are millions and millions of dollars of research and product development around VR goggles,
Yeah.
so VR, XR, with Apple coming out with a Visions. They're $3,400 for a headset. Virtual is going, it's here. It's here to stay. Actually, one of the businesses that I mess around in is with VR tours for locations, like for restaurants and museums and yoga studios and things like that. People want to know before they go what a place looks like. And a virtual tour is a really easy way to highlight what's going on in the business. Google has their street view. And so when you can click on a street view and see what a place looks like, I happen to scope out vacation spots when we're going on vacation to see what it's like. Like if there's an Airbnb, I check out the neighborhood to
Oh yeah.
see what's going on in the neighborhood. That's virtual. VR tours where you have on an Oculus and you can look around or whatever headset you're using. I have an Oculus and I use it all the time for doing stuff. So I think it's here to stay, particularly the virtual meetings. It is not always cheap, depending on what's going on in the economy, for folks to fly here and there to do their thing. So having a virtual conference, a virtual meeting, it's definitely a good way. The entire team that I work with, everyone's in a different city.
Wow.
So I mean, we're on Zoom daily. Most of my sales calls are on Zoom. They're rarely in person. So yeah, I think it's here to stay and it's just going to grow, particularly with the development of more virtual reality headsets
Yeah.
and 360 cameras. There are more and more of them coming on the market all the time. So it is definitely a way to do it, and it's going to grow. I took a trip recently to Italy. We were in Milan, and I kid you not, I saw, oh my God, 7, maybe 8 people walking around. And I don't have it on my desk, but with little virtual cameras, including me on a selfie thing, walking around taking virtual stuff of Milan.
Oh,
And there were a lot of people doing it. I look around, and I see a guy with a long selfie stick with a virtual camera on it. And I'm like, yeah, with a 360 camera. I'm like, okay, yeah,
yeah.
it's here to stay.
Yeah, I have some of those. I've put up some of those early videos with that. So, and it would be curious to see. It took a pandemic, of course, for like this type of meeting to
Mhm.
really hit the part. And I thought that VR might make it, but it didn't quite make it during this time frame. So there's going to be one other event. Something's going to happen, right? So there's going to be some kind of breakthrough that will allow it to hit the mainstream. And of course, AI is what got cracked this year, right? So I find some things like that really, really interesting. Vernon, let me see with this. What's your wish for 2024
Ooh, my wish for 2024 for virtual or just in general?
in general? Your Vernon Ross wish.
Ooh, my Vernon Ross wish. Well, I actually am working on some stuff with virtual and doing some tours. I think there's an opportunity for companies to actually combine virtual tours of their businesses along with an audio tour. So as you're viewing a virtual tour of a place, incorporating audio in. There was a tour provider that I was talking to. And he was like, if there was a way for me to like tell people what was happening in the location, I think it would really help. I had a conversation with a real estate agent, and we worked on it and figured out a way to embed an audio into a virtual tour. And she was telling me, she's like, this is like really bringing in leads, because people click on it and they're hearing it, and it's like I'm there walking them through the property. So I can I want to see something happen with that, because I think it's really the next wave, because people want to, I mean, they do Zillow tours. Think about that. I mean, folks get on Zillow and play around and go and look at properties. And if there's a virtual tour of it, which Zillow now has,
Yes.
I kind of think that's where it's going. So I really, really want to see more stuff happening with the 3 headsets that are like hitting the market. The new Oculus is already out, and that Facebook thing that's like $3,400. That's going to be insane. I don't know if I'm going to get one, but I kind of want to see it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I think things are really going to like take off in the VR space, mostly because there's a huge amount of investment going into it.
Oh, genius. Well, I am on VR on Quest 2. We're going to trade IDs, so I'm going to have to
Oh yeah, we are.
find something that we do here. Vernon, the last piece here. If people only remember one thing from this interview from you, what do you want that one thing to be?
You know what? Almost anyone and everyone can start a podcast about anything you want, and particularly within your company. It is hard now with this hybrid environment, and I talk to folks every day where they have employees that are just distributed. Some are in the office, some are not, and building that team cohesiveness that you used to have when everyone was just in an office environment is extremely difficult to do. But doing some employee podcasts, building for like your ERG groups, stuff like that, it's not super complicated, and it's an easy thing for folks to do. So the one thing I want folks to walk away with, it's not super hard to do a podcast, particularly if you're doing it for your company. If you want to know more about it, reach out to me, but you can do it. It's easy enough to do. There's a lot of tools out there. John has a lot of resources, and I just want you to know it's possible. That's not one of those things that, oh, I can't do that. I'd like to do it, but I don't want to. I can't do it. You know, you can do it.
And of course, I put the link there for Vernon, enterprisepodcaster.com. Again, enterprisepodcaster.com. Go check it out. Go meet Vernon. He's on the speaking tour too, because he got a lot of practice during the pandemic. He was also present. That's where we met, was at our Learnapalooza. Our good friend Darren Nerlin put us together. Vernon, thank you so much for taking a little time out of your day here on the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast.
Absolutely, John. Thanks so much for having me, and hello to everybody, and goodbye.
All right, thank you. We've been meeting here with Vernon Ross from Enterprise Podcaster. Do us a favor, if you're still here, right, hit the subscribe, share, like, or comment button. If you want to subscribe to the podcast, go here, engagingvirtualmeetings.online. And now, if you want to be the next person here on the Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast, just go to this website, engagingvirtualmeetings.com/meet, and hit the interview option, and you can actually see how simple my system is now that I've developed it. And you too could be a guest here on Engaging Virtual Meetings podcast. Until then, we'll see you next time.
Always start people and keep old people. Show you got how.